Our presentation is on technologies and tactics of sea transportation, and more specifically from Columbus, which is around 1492 to the 19th century. Sea travel is one of the oldest forms of transportation and is mostly used for transporting people or items from one landmass to another, when there is either no route by land or if the route by land is treacherous, such as through mountains or deserts. And although ships and boats are primarily used for transportation of people, they can also be used to transport resources, to fish in areas that are not accessible by land, to defend a nation's coast against attackers, or even for leisure. And over time, countries have excelled in certain areas of shipbuilding, such as speed, efficiency, or even ways to assert dominance over other navies. The first recorded sailboat was built by the ancient Egyptians in Mesopotamia around 4000 BC. The Egyptians are known for their engineering and architectural feats, and they took pride in building structures such as boats. And the Egyptian Empire was centered around three major rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, and Nile, so they needed boats to transport items around their empire. And their boats were made with materials such as timber, reeds, and vines, and featured a makeshift sail on top in order to steer, similar to boats from the same time. And Christopher Columbus reflected on boats such as these when he started designing and building his own fleet to explore the world. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 and was an Italian explorer who is credited for discovering the Americas. And Columbus's principal voyage was in 1492 when he assembled a group of around 87 men and 3 ships and set out west from Spain. He was originally trying to find a direct water route going west from Europe to Asia, but he came upon the Caribbean. And when he arrived in the Caribbean, he sailed from island to island looking for precious items, which he was unable to find. And although he is credited with discovering America, there were already civilizations and millions of native people living in America when he discovered it. But his true achievement, or feat, was being one of the first Europeans to open the door for more exploration in the Americas. Columbus's voyage was made possible thanks to his 3 ships, La Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria. These ships were responsible for transporting 87 men and enough resources to sustain them for months. The ships were engineered to be stronger than any previous ship since they had to sustain damages from unforgiving storms for several months. The Santa Maria was a carrack and was the largest of the 3 ships, measuring about 100 feet long. The ship had square sails that increased surface area to better catch the wind since the ship was so large. And carracks, such as the Santa Maria, are primarily used for carrying cargo, men, and cannons, which are typically heavier items. The La Niña and Pinta were caravels, which are much smaller, measuring around 75 feet, and were typically faster since they were narrower and sleeker. And these ships featured a lateen rigging system, which was an important technological advancement that the Santa Maria lacked. The rigging system was a specialized sail attached to a spar, which is a thick and strong pole, which helped with maneuvering and also increased the overall speed of the ship. And caravels such as the Pinta and La Niña were broad-beam vessels, which were mostly used for exploring unknown waters, since they were fast and maneuverable enough to get out of hostile or tight spaces. What set Columbus apart from other explorers and sailors was his technique of oceanic weaponry and warfare. The Santa Maria, which was a larger and slower ship, was equipped with a large amount of cannons, which made his fleet a very dominant force that most hostile nations chose not to engage. The strength and the combat skills of his fleet, combined with the advanced weaponry such as the cannons, made the Spanish a dominant force that was not reckoned with during his voyage to the Americas. And although ships such as carracks, large and brute force vessels, and smaller vessels such as caravels were mostly used for exploration and discovery, galleons were also important during the 16th to 18th century. The majority of galleon owners were the Spaniards, which were used as warships and trading ships. And these were used for trading in hostile territories in order to avoid pirates stealing their cargo. The galleon featured an inward sloped hull at the head of the ship, which was parallel to the ship's inner beam at the waterline. Summed up, this helped improve the ship's stability, which was essential during storms and during combat. Another feature was the lower forecastle, which is the front deck of the ship, and this provided less wind resistance, which improved speed and maneuverability. And compared to past vessels, the galleon was a powerhouse vessel that could powerfully defend itself against opposing forces, navigate efficiently, and help transport goods and other resources. Moving on to steamboats, steamboat engineering started in the late 18th century when engineer John Fitch made a small makeshift vessel powered by a steam-powered engine. This sparked an age of curiosity, and the steam engine was later perfected in 1811 when Robert Fulton and Robert Livingston constructed the first steamboat to successfully traverse the Mississippi River. And this was an impressive feat as the Mississippi River features strong currents and little to no amounts of wind, making travel along the river very difficult. The main driving force of a steam engine is a boiler, which provides an ample amount of steam to turn the wheel, powering the vessel. And in the early years, boilers were heated with wood, which was discovered to be highly inefficient, so coal was used, which was most popular during this age. And in today's age, mostly diesel is used to power such engines, and the engine transforms the produced steam to rotate a paddle wheel at the back of the vessel, which propels the vessel forward. And when not properly maintained, steamboats would explode due to excess pressure and poor ventilation. Moving towards the 19th century, the Americans and British were engaging in battles, and small civil wars were occurring in Europe as well. During the War of 1812, the British used their large, low maneuverability ships to block American ports so the Americans couldn't trade. The Americans responded by engineering sleek and powerful ships in order to go around such blockades. One popular ship was the Clipper, which was developed to speed around the British ships in order to trade items such as opium, spices, and tea. The ship was able to reach 20 knots and did not engage the enemy since that would slow down the ship, leaving it more vulnerable. The Clipper also helped to expand the American trading system, since the ship allowed for faster trade, allowing for more fragile and food items that could spoil to be traded. Other ships in Europe focus on more bulkier ships that allow for transporting a large amount of cargo. Thus, the ships featured a square rig system and multiple bases, making the ships over 60 meters long and granted the ability to hold over 800 tons of cargo. In the latter half of the 19th century, iron was starting to be utilized with naval technology, which was a very large turning point for navies. And since wars started to become more prevalent across the globe, wooden ships were exposed for being very frail, vulnerable to fire at port, and easy to sink. Thus, iron and other metals started to be utilized for vessels in order to be sturdier and for combat. Vessels such as the ironclad were plated, which means layering of materials, with iron and featured heavy-duty guns on all sides facing all directions. These boats were often called river monitors because the American forces often drove ironclads up enemy rivers in order to surround the enemy troops, preventing them from fleeing by river. And ironclads often featured a steam-powered engine, which, as covered previously, was featured in the 18th century. People fear that these ships would sink easily compared to wooden ships since iron is much heavier and denser than wood. In order to combat the heavy weight, the bottom of the ships were filled with air, making them float easier. And overall, the ironclad ships helped to protect passengers, featured heavy weapons for defense, and provided fast transportation.